Victor Quijada, welcome to Cultural Attaché.
Hey, thank you for having me. Great, Chris.
So your company Rubber Band is going to be performing Second Chances at Broad Stage in Santa Monica on March 8th and 9th. Before we get into that, I want to ask you about something that Twyla Tharp is quoted as having said, because you were a member of her company at one point, and she said dance should not just divide people into audience and performers. Everyone should be a participant. How much does that philosophy resonate with you, and how important is it for you to create a similar engagement with your own audience?
Yeah, that is quite important to me. Um, and just to preface that by saying the way that I got into dance, period, was in circles where you're the observer and the participant all at the same time. Versus, being introduced to dance in a dance studio where you are, facing the mirrors and there's a teacher instructing you. And that idea has shown up in my work a lot of different times in a lot of different ways. And I think when I first started choreographing, when I first started my group, there was actually quite a rejection of the theater space because because I wanted to take my choreographic exploration into spaces where there was no dividing line between who was doing and who was not doing. And that meant, taking my crew into clubs and allowing a choreographic sequence to evolve out of improvisation. That meant going to whatever street festival was going on. That meant going into the subway, into the metro, and allowing a situation, a choreographic situation to evolve. But then that theater space also being able to add elements like lighting and music and set design, that has its pros as well. And so I think over the last 20 years, some of my work has really focused on erasing that fourth wall and again, various ways, whether the dances are spilling out over the proscenium threshold or whether the audience is being called to action. Um, or if they're just being asked to question the relationship of the dancers with the space or the dancers with the music or how they're relating their experience to what I'm sharing on stage. So some of those are more nuanced and subtle, and some of those are very obvious and overt. The show we're bringing to Santa Monica this week has a little bit of both.
Well, it's interesting because you were profiled in the New York Times in 2006. And you told them that your goal was to keep your theater from being like watching theater on television. As we find ourselves in a world where televisions are being replaced by streaming devices, or worse yet, these things that we all have in our pockets, how does that inspire you or challenge you to make your theater and your dance more dynamic, more relevant, and more impactful?
Yeah. Um, well, I don't know if I can compete with the immediacy and the briefness of the way we interact now with our phones and how quickly we can go from idea to idea to idea. I think that there's a little bit of attention deficit that goes into my creating. And there's a lot of times where afterwards I kind of look at what I've created and I feel like, wow, I really put a lot of stuff in there. I threw like even the kitchen sink is there, like I probably could have just stayed with one idea. But I think I've been making work for when I think about making work and when I envision who the work is for, invariably I'm thinking about myself out there watching, and what would I want to watch, and how would I want to be ushered through an experience. And I mean, I don't know, I grew up on kung fu action flicks, you know, and like and I'm from the MTV era, and I think that's is the pulse of my creative bloodline. And I'm not part of the TikTok generation. And how will that make my work stand apart from those that will be creating in the future? Not sure. But there is a very sacredness to having 100, 300, 1,000 people come into the space and commune together to experience, to question, to be transported. And I think at this moment, those streaming devices, our phones, even though they are so convenient and they can bring anything in the world to us, so there's a real democratization of information. Like, we can get anything. But that communion of coming together is something that I don't think has been replaced. And I don't think the phones are going to replace it. And I feel like the theater is probably one of the last places, maybe houses of worship. But the theater still stands to maintain that sacredness. Even if I am kind of often in my creation switching from one idea to another, to another, to another. I don't think I'm going to replace the smartphone for a while.
Well, let's hope the smartphone doesn't replace, the performing arts either.
That's better said. Yeah.
Now, with Second Chances, one of the works that you're going to be performing is Trenzado, which debuted in 2020, and it marked your return to performance.
Yeah.
What did that return mean to you, and why was this the work that that served itself best for you to facilitate that return to performance?
Yeah. Well, Trenzado, the timeline for Trenzado kind of starts in 2010 when I asked a visual artist, Sylvain Bowman, to create a set design for me. In 2010, he gave me that. I wasn't able to, it wasn't right for the show. I didn't have the resources. That set design got put on hold until 2014. In 2014, we were doing a residency and there was a scene shop, and we were able to create a version of this set design. And in the other room, I had my composer who was working. I had given him a bunch of raw material to experiment with. And that raw material that my composer was experimenting with was norteñas and corridos and just music that is very typical that you would hear at my parents' house and what I grew up with. And what the set design was this broken outline of a home or the ruins of a house. And immediately it kind of, well, okay, I know what the piece needs to be. And the piece would need to speak about, I mean, I had left homes, I had left cultures, I had this identity crises of like, where do I belong as I move somewhere? I had become a father, which is one of the reasons that I had stopped performing to concentrate on being a director and just being a dancer. It's a whole other implication in your life. And I was becoming a father. Becoming a father meant that I also was questioning, like, am I going to teach my daughter Spanish? Am I going to teach her the ways of my parents and introduce her to la cultura and la raza? And it made me question also my father leaving Mexico and coming to the United States and what they chose to impart with me. A lot of different questions. And it was pretty obvious that if I was going to talk about this, I was going to tell this story, I would probably need to be on stage to tell the story.
Makes sense. Well, let me ask you this because I know Second Chances also allows you to revisit two other works
Yeah.
that you had done for other companies. So how has your second chance at revisiting these works allowed you to sort of evaluate where you were at the time of their creation
Yeah.
versus where you are today?
Yeah. It's a great question, Craig. Um, because I think in 2010, when I created physical linguistics for Hubbard Street Dance Chicago, there was a big questioning in my mind. I couldn't quite understand what was being expected of me when I was being hired as a commissioned choreographer. I knew I personally had this phobia or this aversion to repeating myself in creations, but I had this overwhelming feeling that I was being hired so that I could do a certain thing that I was known to do, and trying to figure out where a signature had evolved, but not using the same tools or the same giving the same results. I was in a very heady place. And so physical linguistics is one of those pieces that I revisited. And then the other piece that I revisited was Second Coming that I made for Scottish Dance Theatre in 2014. And I think in that era, I I wasn't asking the same questions. I think I was a little bit more at ease with navigating where signature and what my tendencies might be, and also being okay with looking again at a theme, not repeating, but looking once again at a certain theme that had already been investigated, but looking for new facets and unwrapping new compartments within that investigation. And so I think those two works, Second Coming and Physical Linguistics, they kind of like, they bookend my, I want to say my trouble, but like the trouble I had with figuring that out as I started to go more and more outside of my company to create on as a freelance choreographer, or as an invited guest choreographer to other companies that had their own thing that I wanted to bring my thing into. Now, when I see
Is
it
it
now,
sorry, but is it easier to answer those questions now with, more than a decade of experience beyond these works?
I see it now, and I think, okay, this is the mechanism that I use here, and I see how important some of like the very earliest questions that I had with my collaborators about audience expectation. You know, one of my lighting collaborator for about 15 years, his name is Yan Li Chan. He worked with me for 15 years, and he had a side hustle of being a sleight of hand magician. And we would talk about expectations, um, misdirection. We would talk about setting up patterns so that you could lull someone into a certain relaxation or mode of expectation. And then, so those kind of conversations and ideas are so infused with the work that I do, and my relationship with the audience, and the way that I want the audience to relate to the work, and to live moments of being unexpectedly confronted, surprised with new developments, be it through misdirection or these surprise patterns that come out of that. So I think for me, and I've had this discussion with other people, why would you bring back old work? My goodness, I think it's so valuable to revisit and to see that's what that's where I was. And that's what I did. I'm looking at it. It's a way of time traveling. It's a way of mentoring your old self. It's a way of being mentored by your old self. I think it's incredibly, if you're able to, and you have the opportunity to, it's like going back into a journal and being like, wow, I think I figured that out. Or wow, I'm still working on that. And that's what this, going back to bringing these two works together as what we call it now, commission suite. It's kind of a mashup of those two works that allows me to do that.
Well, I was looking at the trailer for Second Chances, and you in the text that accompanies the trailer, on your YouTube page, you invite the audience and the dancers to reflect on origin, on belonging, and displacement.
Yeah.
Now, you want to talk about things changing. You could not have imagined when you were putting this together in 2023 that those issues of identity and more importantly citizenship would be as upended as they are in the United States today. And I'm wondering how you think current events are going to magnify an audience response to those themes in this particular program.
Yeah. Well, um, I'll have to witness that. I'll have to discover that. But I have, this, like I said, this piece had its, where is the true genesis of it? I saw Sylvain Bowman's art in 2009 and it was so inspiring. He made the set design in 2010. We actually made it. We constructed it in 2014. The music came together then. In 2017, I had a residency at the Brishnikov Art Center in New York where I started to put together a sketch of this. And when we showed it, the piece does have some, well, I would say controversial themes that we're looking at. And I felt the audience push back or how they received that. That was an important moment. When then I put it back on the shelf and I came back to it later, and we were just performing it 10 days before the election in Pennsylvania. And yeah, we're talking about identity and where you belong and finding your place. And I felt in those different moments when I've showed the work to people, their energy is speaking a lot to me. And the work actually gives me a chance to kind of moderate and adjust and push more or receive less. And so there's a little bit of there's breathing room in the piece where I can ask for more or say, okay, we've had enough. And so that's like a good there's, I don't want to call it a safety net. There's just a good pressure system where I can use the energy in the room as a barometer of how far are we going to go, or how far do we need to go to really like cross over into this fulcrum point where, like, yeah, it's, that line between entertainment and art and something that you just watch or something that you're involved in. Yeah, those are questions that I'm constantly holding on to and experimenting with.
Well, and the nice thing is when you're dancing your own work, you can't get mad at the dancer for having made some alterations in what was designed and choreographed.
Yeah, well, you say that, but I have a lot of notes for myself after the show.
Do you think of your work as being political? And at this point in 2025, is the sheer creation of art in and of itself a political act?
I think that second part, yes, more and more. And I think that this may have been the most politically angled work that I've ever made. And I think for the first 15 years of my making stuff, I was really only focused on, is it possible to take my street dance roots and everything I've acquired in the classical and concert dance world? And what happens if we let it coexist, and how will it affect each other? And I was so preoccupied with that once that was cooked, once this, there's this whole technique that we've developed in this approach that helps dancers from different backgrounds come together and speak this language, this physical language that I've been developing. And once that was cooked, it was back to like, okay, what do you want to say with this language? And in 2018, ever so slightly, I created that, and that was probably my first political work. And then this is my most politically angled creation I've ever dared to make. Yeah.
So far. Um, I want to, finish our time out by asking you about something that a mentor of yours, Rudy Perez, told,
Yeah.
asked in LA Dance Chronicle in 2018. So I'm going to see how you would answer his questions. How does one become an artist today? A complete artist to the extent that you can keep going? How would you answer those questions that he asked?
Mm. Uh, I hope I don't get emotional. Um,
I hope you do.
one of the most, I'll say it's one of the most important things, because it's one of the things that he would speak to me mostly about every time we would speak, and we spoke regularly. There wouldn't be, more than 3 weeks that would pass that we didn't connect by phone. And what Rudy wanted me to know was the most important thing was my relationships with people, my intimate relationships, my friendships, to take care of that. And the human that Rudy was right there with the artist that he was. And I think, there was a memorial for Rudy last April, and everyone that spoke about how Rudy made them feel, the humanity, and how special their interactions were. And that goes beyond the artwork, that goes beyond the performances, that goes beyond the statements that he made as an artist on stage. And I think then, to answer that question, is to not let one overshadow the other. Not that you're an artist that you can be a horrible human being. That being an artist and being a good person are one and the same. And I think that's the example that Rudy portrayed and shared with me and a lot of people that loved him.
So would you define yourself as a complete artist at this point in your career? Using Rudy's definition, of course.
I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best.